Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your 10-minute weekly fix of ancient warfare to take you away from all those annoying, pesky modern world troubles and worries. Let me do that for you by worrying and troubling about ancient warfare. What we do here, of course, is we get questions from viewers, readers, and listeners, and I attempt to answer them at the best of my ability. Make no claims as to what that is. And you, of course, can ask us a question, and however you can find it, you can write me an email, you can comment on a previous podcast or video on YouTube, you can send us a postcard. Actually, it's been a while since I received a postcard, so please send a postcard. I even believe there's been a couple lost in the mail. Someone said they sent one from Portugal, which has never turned up. I don't know who got that or whether they've attempted to answer it. Anyway, today's question is from JackSarge. He is asking me in a question which is fascinating, and I'll get to it in a second, which is, of course, about the Huns. Will I be able to answer this in 10 minutes? This is always the question. What effect did the Hunnic invasions into Western Europe have on Britain? Did Attila send emissaries to Britain or make any demands of it? Right. Ooh, interesting. Now, emissaries to Britain, we're not sure, but I'll get to that because there could be something which is a problem. Now, in this case, it's interesting because this was a comment on a previous podcast about the siege of Naissus. And it actually had a comment in reply to the question talking about a blog, which I thought I'd bring up. And this is Memo from Essex, brought up an academic historian, Caitlin Green, who has a blog about this, that it includes a discussion of Hunnic influence. So you can go there and read that if you want to. However, the interesting thing is what we get in Gildas. Interesting source, writes in a sermon in the late 6th century. It's one of the earliest sources for this period in Dark Ages Britain. Now, the interesting thing for that is, of course, he talks about Britain writing to not an actual person, because we don't have the name, but he talks about the Roman Britons writing to Agitius, Agitius, who was consul for the third time, asking for help against the invasions of the Saxons. Now, that is an interesting misspelling because it could be Aetius, who, of course, is the Magister Militum who faces Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451. Now, he had been consul, and he had been consul for the third time. So that fits with him, but Agitius is not his name. And it's also very late for Roman Britain to be writing to a Roman general. The traditional date, and I think we've talked about it before, of the Romans abandoning Britain is 410 AD under Honorius. Some people put it between 407 and 411. Archaeology shows that there are Roman finds still to be made in Britain at least to 450, 420s. The Notitia Dignitatum has Roman units in Britain circa 420. So the whole idea of when is Roman Britain abandoned by Rome is a tricky one. I think it's a gradual process rather than a bang, it's gone. But most histories of Rome, late Rome, will talk about bang, it's gone. Now, for Roman Britain to be writing, requesting aid from Agitius in roughly 446. That's when the third consulship of Aetius is held, is interesting because it's late. That's a very late date to be writing. It implies, of course, that there is administrative institutions still intact in Roman Britain to be able to request help. The sources on Roman Britain, Bede and others, talk about the 3 times that Roman Britain requests aid and it's sent, and then the previous 2 times it's sent and this time it's not. But we're not sure when those times are. Some people put them all the way back into the 2nd century. Some people put them in the 380s, Magnus Maximus, and then early 5th century under Constantine III. So it's tricky to know which of the 3 moments when these requests occur. So the interesting thing then is there doesn't seem to be any contact between the Huns and Britain. There does seem to be a problem that there are invaders into Britain at a time where Britain feels vulnerable and possibly is abandoned, and they're requesting aid. The Huns may have a role to play in the sense that their invasion may have put pressure on Saxons, Frisians, Jutes, Angles to move and invade Britain, because of course they're looking not to plunder and raid, they're looking to settle. And that's interesting in itself. Now, all of that is thrown into vast confusion by Bede, writing in the early 8th century, and he mentions the Huns, and I'll get to that in just a second. So you've got that kind of problem of if they're writing requesting help, and of course the help doesn't come from Aetius because he's building a massive army and alliance to fight the Huns in 451. And one of the other things, of course, about that is, generally speaking, the invasion of 451, where the Huns are on the rampage, they break the walls of Orleans but don't sack it because Aetius and his alliance arrives, is generally painted as a picture of this is all happening very quickly. But the reality seems to be that Aetius has needed to spend quite some time shoring up the Visigoths and the Alans to join his alliance. Now, in 446, which is when he holds his third consulship, Attila is in fact rampaging in the Eastern Roman Empire, even putting Constantinople under siege, but not being able to take it. And our sources are terrible, but a whole range of towns are taken by Attila. He's then paid a huge amount of gold, £6,000, to leave the Eastern Roman Empire. And he does. And the next time we see him is when he invades the Western Roman Empire. One wonders whether he was paid to invade the Western Roman Empire by the Eastern Roman Empire, but that's a conspiracy theory. Now, what I wanted to say is, of course, complicated by Bede. Now, Bede, Book 5, Chapter 9 of his history, the history of the English people, ecclesiastical history, generally known as, he says that he's talking about the countries or the peoples from countries who now inhabit Britain. This is talking about Egbert, and he talks about many countries he knew to be in Germany, of whom the English or Saxons, which now inhabit Britain, are well known to have had beginning and offspring, whereby it is that to this day they are corruptly called Garmans by the Britons that are their neighbours. Such are now the Frisians, the Rugians, the Danes, the Huns, the Old Saxons, and the Borucutuars, the Bructi area of Westphalia. There are many other nations in the same parts observing yet the same rites. And interestingly, the idea that there might be Hunnic settlers in Britain who presumably split off from the main body of the Huns and have come to Britain is only found there in Bede. It's similar to what we term in terms of when we talk about Anglo-Saxon Britain, and we didn't, Anglo-Saxon Britain has the word Angle in it, and yet we tend to ignore the Angles and we just talk about the Saxon invasions. But the Saxons are only a part of it. The Jutes, who are in Kent, and then the Isle of Wight, and the Jutish kingdoms, which become, is it Mercia or Wessex? Oh, I think it's Wessex. But they're Saxon, so it's a kind of terminology. There's other various myths and stories of people coming to Britain from different places, and the idea that there are Huns is only found in Bede. No one else mentions that word. The Rugi is interesting. The Rugians are originally intended to be one of the, is that Decebalus is a Rugian? I think so. So there's all sorts of interesting ideas of using those words to evoke barbarian difference rather than being an accurate depiction of where those people actually come from. So I don't know that you can take that to say there are definitely Hunnic settlers in Britain. I think you can take that with a grain of salt. Having said that, of course, the Huns do become foederati certainly of Belisarius. So the idea that there may have been Hunnic troops sent as foederati to a Roman Britain that's obviously not disconnected from Rome, because if you're sending foederati over there, they're Roman enough to have foederati. And I think Vortigern's hiring of Hengst and Horsa is a foederati arrangement. So it's possible that a group of Huns were hired by a Romanesque late Roman Britain ruler to be troops under their command. It's possible. I don't know that there's any archaeological or anthropological evidence of Hunnic genomes in Britain. No, I don't think so. No one's found that I've heard of. But well, complicated. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Jack. And join me again for another Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.